My dad chose my cousin over me, funded his future, and ruined mine, but karma left him drowning in regret as I built my own life. Family can be the anchor that grounds us or the wave that knocks us off balance. In my case, it was both, and it all began when my father decided to sacrifice my future for the sake of my cousin. Today, I want to share my story, a tale that might be both heartbreaking and relatable, and one that ultimately shaped who I am. This journey is not just a recounting of the past, but also an exploration of how we choose to shape our own destinies when the world decides to push us in the other direction. If you're curious about the kind of strength it takes to break free from such challenges, stay with me. I grew up in a household where love and warmth were as rare as sunshine on a rainy day. My mother had passed away while giving birth to me, which left my father as a hollowed-out version of the man he might have been. He blamed me for her death, and that blame showed up in the way he treated me, not with outright hatred, but with a cold, detached distance. There was no affection, no hugs, and not a single word of praise. I existed, but I wasn't really alive in his eyes. Our house was filled with my mother's presence, her photographs, her books, her clothes. It was like a shrine to her, untouched and sacred. I would sneak into her room sometimes, trying to touch her belongings to form some kind of connection to her. My father, on the other hand, never once spoke about her, except in moments when he wanted to make me feel like I was the reason for her absence. Growing up, I tried to make sense of my father's coldness by believing that maybe I wasn't good enough, that if I could just do something extraordinary, maybe I could earn his approval. It didn't help that my cousin Jake, my father's favorite, entered the picture when I was still a child. Jake lost his father in a tragic accident, and my father took him in. He was my age but everything I wasn't: sporty, charming, full of life, and my father's pride. Suddenly, it wasn't just my father I was trying to please, I had to compete with Jake, too. The first major incident that made me realize how far my father had distanced himself from me was during a school science fair. I had worked for weeks on a model of the solar system that could move, using gears and pulleys. It was a labor of love, something I was genuinely proud of. When I won first place, I rushed home to tell my dad, hoping that maybe, just maybe, this would be the moment he'd smile and say he was proud of me. But when I got home, he was sitting in the living room with Jake, laughing about something that had happened during Jake's football game. I told him about the science fair, and he just nodded, barely glancing up from his conversation. It was like I wasn't even there. High school came, and it was a repeat of the same story. I worked hard, got good grades, joined sports teams, though I was never great at them, all in an effort to make my father proud. But every effort I made was overshadowed by Jake's presence. Jake was everything my father wanted in a son. When Jake played in a football game, my father cheered from the stands. When I won a writing award, he asked if it would help me get a sports scholarship. My achievements were always minimized, my efforts dismissed. My father wanted a son who would make him proud in front of the world. And in his eyes, Jake was that son. Then came the real kicker: college. I had worked my tail off, studying hard, saving money from part-time jobs, and applying for every scholarship I could find. I got accepted into a decent university, and even though I knew money would be tight, I hoped my dad would help. After all, wasn't that what parents did? I never expected him to pay for everything, but I hoped for some kind of support. But my hopes were shattered one afternoon when I overheard him talking on the phone to Jake, telling him that he would pay for his entire college tuition. I couldn't believe it. When I asked him if he could help me too, he looked at me like I was crazy and said, "Jake needs it more than you do. I can't afford to pay for both of you." Just like that, my college dreams were gone. I tried to make it work. I worked nights and weekends at a diner, took out loans, and applied for scholarships, but the strain was too much. After my first semester, I had to drop out. Meanwhile, Jake was living the dream, attending a prestigious university, going on spring break trips, posting pictures of his new laptop, bought by my father, of course, and enjoying life. It hurt, more than I can describe. It was like every time I saw one of Jake's social media posts, a knife twisted a little deeper in my chest. Eventually, I had enough. I packed my things and left home, cutting off all contact with my father and Jake. I moved to a new town, got a tiny studio apartment, and took whatever jobs I could find to make ends meet. It was tough. I waited tables, worked construction, pulled night shifts at gas stations, anything to keep a roof over my head. I was exhausted all the time. But for the first time, I felt free. I was living life on my own terms. No longer in anyone's shadow. I found work as a manager at a bookstore. It wasn't the career I had dreamed of, but it was something. Being surrounded by books gave me comfort. A sense of stability in a world that had always felt chaotic. I even started taking night classes at a community college, working toward the degree I had always wanted. Slowly, I began to rebuild my life. Along the way, I made friends. People who accepted me for who I was. Not for who they wanted me to be. We had game nights, went on camping trips, and celebrated each other's small victories. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine, and that made all the difference. 3 years later, out of the blue, I got a call from my father. I hadn't spoken to him since I left, and hearing his voice brought back a flood of memories, most of them painful. He sounded different, older, worn out. He tried to make small talk, but I knew there was more to the story. And then he told me, he needed money. A lot of it. I couldn't help but laugh. This was the man who never gave me a dime for college. Who chose my cousin over me every single time. And now he was asking me for help. I asked him why he wasn't asking Jake. After all, Jake was the golden boy, wasn't he? My father mumbled something about Jake being too busy and not having the means to help. The irony of the situation was almost too much to handle. After years of being told that Jake was better, that he deserved everything I didn't, my father was now coming to me for support. I made it clear that I wasn't going to help him. It was too little, too late. I had spent years trying to earn his love and approval. And now that he needed something from me, he was ready to play the role of the remorseful father. I ended the call, feeling a strange mix of emotions, relief, sadness, anger. For the first time, I had stood up for myself. In the days that followed, I kept replaying the conversation in my head. Part of me felt guilty. He was still my father, after all, but a bigger part of me felt proud. I had finally stopped chasing after something that was never going to be mine. I remembered all the times I had needed him, and he wasn't there. My first heartbreak, my high school graduation, learning to drive, all the moments when a kid needs their father. And he was absent. He chose not to be there for me. And now it was my turn to choose. Curiosity got the better of me. Though, I wanted to know what had happened to Jake, the cousin who had taken everything that should have been mine. I reached out to some family friends, trying to piece together the story. It turned out that my father had gone all in on Jake, paid for his college, helped him with a down payment on a house, bought him a car, even invested in a business venture Jake wanted to start. My father had taken out loans, maxed out credit cards, even remortgaged the house to give Jake the life he thought he deserved. But Jake's business had flopped, and now my father was drowning in debt. Jake, the golden child, had turned out to be not so golden after all. He had convinced my father to invest in a tech startup with some friends. And when it failed, he was left with nothing. My father had asked Jake for help, but Jake had refused, saying he couldn't spare any money. It was almost poetic, after years of my father putting Jake on a pedestal. Jake had left him high and dry. I should have felt vindicated. But mostly, I just felt tired of the endless drama, the lingering pain, the constant what-ifs. I thought about how different my life could have been if my father had invested in me instead of Jake. Maybe I would have finished college. Maybe I'd be in a different career. Maybe things would have been easier. But then again, maybe I wouldn't have learned the lessons I did about self-reliance, perseverance, and the value of building my own life. I remembered the long nights spent studying after exhausting shifts at work. The sense of pride I felt when I managed to pay rent on my own. The friendships I had made along the way, people who became my chosen family. I decided to send my father a text. I told him I knew what had happened with Jake, and that I hoped he could see now the value of the choices he had made. I didn't offer to help, and I didn't gloat. I just wanted him to understand that I wasn't the same kid he used to ignore and push around. I was an adult now, capable of making my own decisions, and I didn't owe him anything. As the days went by, I started to feel better about my decision. I realized that by not giving in to his request, I was finally taking control of my own life. I wasn't living for his approval anymore. I had built something for myself, and I was proud of it. I didn't need him to tell me I was worthy. I knew it for myself. Life has a funny way of bringing things full circle. My father's choices led him to where he is now, alone and struggling. My choices led me to a life that, while not perfect, is filled with people who care about me, a job that brings me comfort, and the hope of something better on the horizon. I still don't know if I'll ever have a relationship with my father again. Maybe, one day, I'll be able to forgive him. But for now, I'm focusing on myself, on the life I've built, and on the people who truly matter. The lesson I've learned from all of this is simple. Family isn't just about blood. It's about the people who stand by you, who lift you up, who see your worth even when the world doesn't. It's about the family you choose, not the one you're born into. My father sacrificed my future for my cousin, but in doing so, he gave me the strength to build a future of my own. And for that, in a strange way, I'm grateful. So, if you're out there, struggling with a family that doesn't see you, know this: you have the power to create your own path. It won't be easy, and there will be times when you want to give up, but the life you build for yourself will be worth every tear, every sleepless night, every sacrifice, and one day, you'll look back and realize that you didn't need anyone's approval to be worthy, you always were. Mother-in-law ruined my wedding by spiking my drink, then tried to buy my forgiveness with $5,000. Now we're left to navigate the fallout. Let me tell you a story that seems too dramatic to be real. A tale of love, betrayal, and the complexity of family. It's the kind of story that starts with the fairy tale feeling of a wedding but spirals into a deeply challenging lesson about human relationships, trust, and what it truly means to forgive. The first time I met Jaden, I never would have imagined the roller coaster our relationship would take me on. And even less could I predict that the biggest twist of all would come not from Jaden or myself, but from his mother, Maria. Let me take you through the journey from the very beginning, all the way to the aftermath of our big day, and the unexpected fallout that came from someone we were supposed to trust. Our journey together began quite unexpectedly, at a small coffee shop where I was a regular. Each morning, I needed my caffeine fix just to face the day. I'm a creature of habit, always ordering a latte and enjoying the small routine that brought some structure to my chaotic life. It was one day during one of these mundane mornings that I noticed him, a tall man with gentle eyes standing behind me in line. He looked kind, but I didn't pay him much attention at first. I was in my own world, mentally counting down the seconds until I had my latte in hand. The next time I saw him was just a few days later. This time, we bumped into each other, quite literally, as I turned too quickly from the counter. We ended up chatting while waiting for our drinks. It turned out that Jaden and I had a lot more in common than I would have ever thought. We talked about our favorite books, our odd childhood stories, and our mutual love for that cozy little coffee shop. What I remember most was how easy it was to laugh with him. There was a spark that ignited between us, something that felt real and comforting, like the warmth of a fire on a cold day. From that day forward, we started spending more time together. What began as casual conversations turned into real dates. There were dinners at tiny Italian restaurants, hikes through scenic trails, and late nights singing terrible karaoke songs, neither of us caring how out of tune we sounded. Jaden wasn't the typical guy the first would have gone for, but he was exactly what I needed: genuine, warm, and supportive. Over time, our connection deepened, and I found myself falling for him. There was a sincerity in his laughter and a kindness in his eyes that made me feel more at ease than I ever had with anyone else. 2 years after our first encounter, on the anniversary of our first date, Jaden proposed. We were in a cozy mountain cabin, snow falling softly outside, and the crackle of the fireplace filling the silence as we cuddled together. When Jaden got down on one knee, I could barely remember the words he said because all I could focus on was the love shining in his eyes. Without hesitation, I said yes. The future seemed perfect. I could already picture our wedding day, the life we'd build together, and all the joys that would follow. The wedding planning was a whirlwind of excitement. I threw myself into the details, from picking out the flowers to the perfect dress. Jaden was my rock through all of it. But there was another presence that entered my life during this period: his mother, Maria. I had only met Maria after Jaden and I got engaged. She lived out of town, and due to the distance, we hadn't had a chance to meet earlier. At first, Maria seemed welcoming. She hugged me tightly and said she was thrilled that Jaden had found someone like me. Jaden was her only child, And she said gaining a daughter-in-law was like finally having the daughter she'd always wished for. But as the days went by, I began to notice another side to Maria. It was during one of her weekend visits that she made the first remark, a seemingly innocent comment about the breakfast I'd prepared. I had made pancakes, and as Jaden stepped outside to get some fresh air, Maria looked at me with a tight smile and said, "Oh, I guess you don't worry too much about carbs." Huh? I tried to laugh it off. But her words stung. It was a small comment, but it lingered with me. Later that day, as we looked through wedding magazines, she pointed at a dress and said, "This one's beautiful, but it's for someone with a very specific figure. Not everyone can pull it off." She glanced at me as she said it, her meaning clear. Again, I tried to let it slide, but it was impossible not to feel the sting of her words. These comments became more frequent. Maria would make observations about my weight, the snacks in my kitchen, and even the dresses I tried on. She'd mentioned that a friend's daughter had lost 20 pounds before her wedding, or that she herself kept a healthy lifestyle to stay trim. What bothered me the most was the way she acted differently in front of Jaden. When he was around, she was all smiles and compliments. But the moment he left the room, the digs would start again. I felt like I was living in two different worlds, one where I was accepted, and one where I was constantly judged. At first, I didn't tell Jaden about Maria's comments. I didn't want to create tension between us, especially since we were newly engaged and in such a happy place. I kept convincing myself that I could handle it, that it wasn't worth making an issue of. But it wasn't easy. Maria began showing up more and more, offering her help with wedding planning that I didn't ask for. It felt suffocating. I worked full-time during the week, and my weekends were supposed to be my time to focus on the wedding plans. But Maria's constant presence made it impossible. Every decision seemed to come with a side of judgment from her. One day, I decided I needed some time to myself. I told Maria that I'd be busy that weekend and wouldn't be able to meet her. I mentioned that I was planning to go dress shopping, hoping to finally enjoy this moment for myself. But to my dismay, Maria insisted on coming along, and I didn't know how to say no. During the shopping trip, she suggested dresses that didn't appeal to me at all, and every time I tried something on, she had a comment, "It's nice, but it's a bit snug around the waist," she'd say, or, "Maybe something more flowy would suit you better." I felt drained, like I couldn't even breathe without her judgment hanging over me. It was after that day that I decided I had to set some boundaries. The next time I planned to go dress shopping, I told Jaden I wanted it to be just my mom and my maid of honor. I didn't want Maria there. But my plan unraveled when Jaden, unaware of my discomfort, mentioned our plans to his mom. Of course, Maria called me immediately, asking what time she should come over. I panicked and came up with a flimsy excuse, that the bridal shop only allowed 2 guests. And my mom and maid of honor were already coming. Maria saw right through it. She called it ridiculous and questioned me. But I stuck to my story. I knew it was a poor excuse, but I just couldn't face another day of feeling judged. Despite everything, the wedding day arrived, and I was determined to make it perfect. The ceremony was beautiful, and as I walked down the aisle, the look on Jaden's face made every struggle worthwhile. The reception started off wonderfully. The venue was gorgeous, the food delicious, and our first dance was magical. Everything seemed to be falling into place. And for a moment, I let myself believe that all the stress had been worth it. Then came the moment that changed everything. I walked over to the bar to get myself a drink. And there was Maria. She smiled at me, offered to get me something, and handed me a Shirley Temple. I thanked her and took a sip. A few minutes later, I began to feel strange, drowsy, like my body was giving out. Before I knew it, I had collapsed on the floor, and everything went black. When I came to, I could hear Jaden's panicked voice, calling for help. It was chaotic. People gathered around, concerned faces blurring together as I tried to focus. When the EMTs arrived, they asked what I had eaten and drunk. I told them everything, including the Shirley Temple Maria had given me. It was then that Maria admitted she had added alcohol to the drink, thinking it would help me relax. I was stunned. Why would she spike my drink without telling me? To make matters worse, my maid of honor, Emily, pointed out that I had taken some anxiety medication just before the ceremony to calm my nerves. The combination of the alcohol and the medication had caused me to pass out. Jaden was furious. I had never seen him so angry. He confronted Maria right there. telling her how reckless she had been. The joyous atmosphere we had worked so hard to create vanished. Guests began to leave, and the reception ended far earlier than planned. It was heartbreaking. This was supposed to be the happiest day of our lives. But instead, it had ended in chaos and hurt. In the days that followed, Jaden and I tried to pick up the pieces. Jaden was deeply hurt by what had happened. He loved his mother, but he couldn't ignore what she had done. He decided to set boundaries, telling Maria that from now on, they would only see each other on holidays and special occasions. No more surprise visits. No more constant phone calls. It was a difficult decision, and I could see how much it pained him. But he was doing it for us. Maria didn't take it well. She tried to reach out to me, showing up at my workplace and even crying in front of strangers, begging me to talk to Jaden. She wanted things to go back to the way they were, but she still hadn't apologized to me directly. She kept saying she hadn't meant any harm, that it was just a prank gone wrong. It was clear that she didn't understand the impact her actions had had on us. Eventually, Maria tried to apologize in her own way. She invited us over for dinner, and after an awkward meal, she handed me a check for $5. She said she was truly sorry for ruining our wedding day and wanted to make up for it. I didn't know how to react. It felt strange, almost as if she were trying to buy our forgiveness. Jaden and I talked about it afterward, and neither of us knew what to do. We still haven't cashed the check. It sits in a drawer, a reminder of everything that happened. Over time, things have started to improve, albeit slowly. Maria has respected the boundaries we set, and our relationship with her has been civil, if not warm. I've learned a lot from this experience, about forgiveness, about standing up for myself, and about the importance of setting boundaries. Even with family, it hasn't been easy, and there are still moments when I feel the sting of what happened. But I'm determined to move forward. One of the most valuable lessons I've learned is that forgiveness doesn't always mean forgetting or pretending that everything is okay. Sometimes, forgiveness is about letting go of the anger and choosing to move forward. Even if the relationship will never be what it once was, it's also about protecting your own well-being and understanding that it's okay to set limits on what you will accept from others, even those who are supposed to be family. If there's one piece of advice I'd give to anyone going through something similar, it's this: trust your instincts. If someone makes you feel uncomfortable, even if they're family, you have every right to protect your peace. You can love someone and still set boundaries. And sometimes, the most loving thing you can do, for yourself and for them, is to create the space needed for healing. My story may have started with a dream wedding turned nightmare, but it's also a story of growth, resilience, and learning to navigate the complexities of family dynamics. I hope that by sharing it, others might find the courage to stand up for themselves, to set the boundaries they need, and to find a path forward, even when it seems impossible.